Welcome back to the World Extreme Medicine podcast with me, Owen Walker. In this session, I'm speaking with Jeremy Windsor, and we're just going to do a quick episode on just taking a look behind the scenes at some of the excellent speakers lined up for the World Extreme Medicine Conference in 2024. This is due to be held on the 16th to 18th of November, and Jeremy is one of the engaged speakers which will be speaking there. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Owen. Nice to speak to you.
Great to have you with us, Jeremy. Jeremy, I just wondered if you could just give us a quick bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Windsor. I'm a consultant in anaesthetics and critical care medicine at Chesterfield Royal Hospital in the UK. I'm also the director of the Centre of Mountain Medicine at the University of Central Lancashire. And for probably the last 30 or so years, I've been climbing mountains, including Mount Everest.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So, Jeremy, could you just give us an idea of what topic you'll be speaking on within WEM24?
Okay, Owen, well, look, to answer that question, I'm going to start by saying what the talk is not about. Okay, so it's not going to be a case-by-case description of the hundreds of deaths that we've seen on Mount Everest over the course of the last century. It's not about the patterns of injury or the illnesses or what lessons have emerged. It's definitely not about epidemiology. In many ways, the talk is not so much about the mountaineers themselves who've sadly passed away on the mountain, but very much about those who've been left behind. So the vast majority of my clinical work is spent in intensive care. Over the course of many years, those who work in intensive care have become, I think, very good at what I'd describe as managing deaths. There's this concept, and it's emerged over the course of recent decades, the idea of a good death. Now, you could argue that on mountains like Mount Everest and in other places, good deaths are few and far between. But the argument that I want to make in this talk is that it is possible, with a lot of thought and a lot of effort, to try and make these deaths as good as possible. Now, why is it important to have a good death? Well, put simply, the better someone dies, the better those around them manage. So friends, families, and acquaintances are able to cope far better if they perceive that the way in which their loved ones passed away was in a positive and engaged manner. And what we see over and over again on large mountains such as Mount Everest, that this simply doesn't happen. And those who survive are left with a terrible experience from having lost a loved one, but made all the worse by the experience that they encounter afterwards. So what I'm hoping to show in this talk is give two examples. One, a death that occurred on an intensive care unit, one that I would consider a good death. And certainly from the feedback from family and friends, it appears very much to be the case. And I want to contrast that with a death that occurs on Mount Everest. And over the years, I've unfortunately encountered a number of conversations that I've had with families. And I want to try and give a very typical example of a death on Mount Everest and compare the two. And what I really want then to go on and show is how we can, as healthcare professionals, not only help those who lose people on Mount Everest, but in other experiences, other walks of life, and try and provide people with the tools, ideas, examples of ways in which we can do our best to create this environment and, as I say, create a good death.
Listen, that's fantastic, Jeremy. And like you said, I think the power to that is contextualizing it within case studies, and those two case studies sound absolutely fantastic. So from a key takeaways perspective, Jeremy, could you maybe just point to some key takeaway points that you'd like to confer to the audience and that they'll hear more of in WEM24?
So I will go through at length ideas of the aspects behind a good death and how that they could be applied on the mountain. I'll give one example to begin with. For some people, not all people, a religious experience is important in and around the time of someone passing, and to know that your family member was blessed or was engaged in some sort of religious process shortly around the time that they passed away can have real meaning, real strength to an individual. I was guiding on a mountain in Nepal probably a decade ago now. It was a trekking group. It was an older group. I would say their average age was probably in their early 70s, and we were trekking through the Kathmandu Valley, so not far from Kathmandu. We were probably at an altitude of perhaps 2,500 meters. Unfortunately, a woman on the expedition passed away quite suddenly on the final day of the trek. She was in her early 70s. She was accompanied by her husband. And of course, it came as a dramatic shock to all those involved, and it was incredibly upsetting. But what I think really helped, and with some effort from the Sirdar, one of our chief guides, a Sherpa, I was able to go with him to the local monastery, which was just a few hundred meters away, because I knew that after spending time with this couple for the last week, they were fascinated by Buddhist mythology. They had spent a great deal of time in the country. Although they weren't practicing Buddhists, they had an enormous respect for the culture and the Buddhism that wherever you go in Nepal is never more than a short distance away. I went with the Sirdar. We spoke with the leader of the Buddhist community, and it was one of those conversations. I wasn't quite sure whether I'd got through. I wasn't sure what I'd asked for, and I wasn't sure that the response that I got. And we walked away, and I returned to the lodge where the couple were, and the friends and the trekkers. And over the course of about an hour, and it still catches in my throat as I describe this, you could hear the music start from the Buddhist temple. And over the course of half an hour or so, the music got louder and louder, and a procession had begun. And the leader of the monastery, together with his monks, came down to the trekking lodge and conducted a religious ceremony that went on for several hours at the lodge. And they went through a series of blessings and chants. And you could see that for the husband who was with his wife, who'd only passed away that previous day, that he was overwhelmed with the emotion of seeing this service take place. And this is just one of many examples of trying to personalize the experience that loved ones go through and try as best you can to make this into a good death. And, I'm still in contact with that man, the husband, years later. He wrote saying how much of a benefit it was. He knew that his wife wasn't a Buddhist, but the attention that it provided and the respect that they were given was just an incredibly important experience in that grieving process, and helped him and his family on the way into dealing with that experience. And it's these sort of things, Owen, that I hope to try and describe when it comes to the talk in November.
Listen, that's fantastic, Jeremy. And like you said, it's really powerful to see the kind of mix of cultures, but also the cultural appropriation and indeed how that works within the end of life. So that's absolutely fascinating, actually. So if you'd like to hear more from Jeremy and indeed his full talk and fantastic learning points, please do join us at the World Extreme Medicine Conference 2024 this November for both an engaging and inspirational lineup of speakers. Jeremy, that just leaves me to say thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Owen. See you in November.